fire burning low in the dark. Not a campfire in the way you imagine it. No music, no laughter, just heat and smoke rising into a sky with no name for its stars yet. Somewhere past the edge of the light, something is watching. Not hunting, not yet, just watching. Two eyes low to the ground, catching the orange flicker and throwing it back. An animal built by 3 million years of evolution to fear exactly this. Fire, upright primates, the smell of blood and smoke mixed together. And yet does not run. That single decision, made by an animal we have never named, in a moment no one recorded, is the reason you now share your home with a creature that can read your face better than most humans can. This is not a story about dogs. This is a story about the first time in the history of life on Earth that two apex predators looked at each other across a fire and chose not to kill. Most people think domestication was something we did. That humans, clever and dominant, reached into the wild and tamed the wolf, bred the danger out of it, shaped it like clay into something obedient. That is the story taught in classrooms. It is also almost certainly wrong, because to tame a wolf, you would first have to catch one. And an adult wolf, fast, powerful, wired for suspicion, is not something a small band of Paleolithic humans, armed with sharpened sticks, could simply walk up and capture. There is a more unsettling possibility that the wolves came first, that somewhere between 40,000 and 15,000 years ago, in the frozen expanse of Ice Age Eurasia, it was not humans who initiated the relationship that would change both species forever. It was them. Picture the wolf as it actually was, not the imagined ancestor of a golden retriever. A Pleistocene wolf, heavier, more muscular, its skull built for crushing the bones of megafauna that no longer exist. An animal that hunted in coordinated packs across a continent of ice, competing with cave lions, cave hyenas, and, increasingly, with something new. Us, humans at this point in history, were not the planet's dominant species. We were opportunists, scavengers as much as hunters. Slow, weak-jawed, thin-skinned, but armed with something no other predator on Earth possessed. Fire, tools, and a habit that would prove more dangerous than any claw. We left waste behind, bones stripped of meat, carcasses too depleted to finish. The debris of human hunting parties scattered across campsites that stayed in one place for days, sometimes weeks. To a hungry wolf on the margins of a pack, young, low-ranking, pushed to the edges of the hierarchy, that waste was not garbage. It was opportunity. Here's where the story stops being about sentiment and starts being about something colder. Math. Every wild animal runs a constant, silent calculation. Approach and risk death. Flee and guarantee hunger. For most creatures, in most situations, fear wins. Is supposed to win. Fear is what keeps you alive long enough to reproduce. But scarcity changes the equation. A wolf on the edge of starvation does not calculate the way a well-fed wolf does. Desperation lowers the threshold for risk. And so, generation after generation, across hundreds of human campsites scattered over Ice Age Europe and Asia, a specific kind of wolf began to emerge. Not the boldest wolves. Boldness got animals killed by spear-throwing hominids defending their kill. Not the most aggressive wolves, either. Aggression triggered violence. The wolves that survived long enough to feed near humans generation after generation were the ones with the lowest fear response. The ones whose stress hormones spiked less sharply at the smell of smoke, the sound of human voices, the sight of upright, two-legged movement. In 2019, researchers studying the genetics of early canid domestication noticed something strange. The very first physical differences between wolves and proto-dogs were not about size or speed or intelligence. They were about the adrenal gland. The first thing evolution changed was not the body. It was the nervous system's relationship to fear. Before the dog had a different shape, it already had a different soul. This is where the story becomes something closer to horror than to comfort. Because no human ever decided this was happening. There was no plan, no breeding program, no moment where a Paleolithic hunter looked at a wolf pup and thought, I will make this animal my companion. What happened instead was quieter, and in some ways more disturbing. Evolution itself became an unconscious collaboration between two species that did not yet trust each other, did not yet understand each other, and were not yet capable of anything resembling friendship. Humans tolerated the boldest of the fearless wolves near their camps. Not out of affection, but because a wolf that ate scraps instead of raiding a food cache was, in a strange way, useful. It cleaned the camp of waste. It made noise when other predators approached. It offered, without knowing it, protection in exchange for permission to exist nearby. And the wolves that could tolerate proximity to humans passed that tolerance to their offspring. Two species, each unaware they were shaping the other, spent thousands of years running an experiment neither had designed. The result was not a decision. It was a filter. Fear filtered out generation after generation, until what remained was an animal fundamentally different from the one that had first approached the firelight. Something else happened, almost as a side effect. And this is where the story stops being about behavior and starts being about biology rewriting itself in real time. Reduced fear response is controlled by hormonal and developmental pathways that do not only affect the brain. They also affect the body, pigmentation, ear structure, jaw size, the timing of skeletal development. Select for tameness, and, without intending to, you also select for floppy ears. Curled tails, patches of white fur, rounder faces, eyes that appear, to the human brain, unmistakably young. This is not a coincidence. It is a documented biological phenomenon that researchers have since replicated in laboratory studies on foxes, breeding for tameness alone across a few dozen generations, and watching, with something like unease, physical traits emerge that no one had bred for directly. Which means the face of the dog beside you right now, the face that you find irresistible, the face that triggers something ancient and protective in your chest, was not selected for its cuteness. It was a side effect of selecting for the absence of fear. You did not fall in love with a face. You fell in love with the visible signature of 10,000 years of an animal learning not to be afraid of you. But tolerance is not the same as partnership. Something else had to happen, something that turned proximity into alliance. Here the evidence becomes strange, and stranger the closer you look. Isotope analysis of ancient dog remains, chemical signatures locked into bone, revealing what an animal ate across its lifetime, shows something researchers did not expect. Some of the earliest proto-dogs, found at sites in Siberia and Belgium dated to over 30,000 years ago, were eating diets remarkably similar to the humans they lived alongside. Not scraps, not leftovers, shared food, deliberately given, which raises an uncomfortable question. Why would a species already struggling with scarcity, already fighting the elements of an ice age, choose to feed a large predator capable of killing them? The answer researchers keep circling back to is not efficiency. It is not economics. It is that the wolves, at some point, stopped being competitors and became something humans had never had before. Allies with senses we did not possess. A wolf can smell a threat a human cannot see. Hear a herd of prey a human cannot detect. Track a wounded animal across terrain a human would lose within minutes. In a world where every night carried the possibility of death by exposure, starvation, or ambush, an animal that could sense danger before a human noticed, it was not a companion. It was an early warning system with teeth. Here is the deeper truth hiding beneath the biology. And it is the part of this story that unsettles even the researchers who study it most closely. Wolves are not naturally submissive animals. In the wild, a wolf pack is not a hierarchy of blind obedience. It is closer to a family unit, built on cooperation, food sharing, and coordinated defense of territory. When early proto-dogs began integrating into human groups, something remarkable happened at the level of cognition itself. They did not simply tolerate humans. They began treating humans as pack, which means for the first time in the evolutionary history of two entirely separate species, one predator began directing the social instincts evolved for its own kind. The instinct for loyalty, hierarchy, cooperation, even grief to a different species altogether. Dogs, uniquely among domesticated animals, retain the capacity to read human faces, follow human pointing gestures, and respond to human emotional tone. Abilities that even our closest primate relatives, chimpanzees, largely lack. A chimpanzee, raised from infancy in a human household, will never learn to follow a pointed finger the way a dog does within its first few months of life. Something in the wolf's mind was already built for this. Built for reading intention in another creature's eyes. Built for belonging to something larger than itself. It simply needed a new species to belong to. But this alliance was not without cost. And the archaeological record hints at something researchers rarely say aloud in public lectures. Sites across Ice Age Europe show early dogs buried with the same care given to human dead. Not discarded. Not left where they died. Placed deliberately in graves, sometimes alongside human remains, sometimes alone, sometimes with objects that suggest ritual, not utility. A creature that began as a predator on the edge of a human camp had, within a few thousand years, become something buried with grief. This should stop you, because grief is not a survival strategy. There is no evolutionary advantage to mourning an animal. And yet humans, tens of thousands of years before writing, before agriculture, before anything resembling civilization as we define it, were already experiencing loss over the deaths of another species. Which means the bond between human and wolf was never purely transactional. Somewhere in that long, unrecorded relationship between the fire and the scraps, and the shared warmth of two bodies sleeping closer together each winter, something crossed a line that evolution never predicted. Two predators from different branches of the tree of life, separated by 60 million years of independent evolution, developed something that looks, from every angle we can measure, like love. Widen the lens now. Because what happened between one wolf and one human band was not an isolated event. It happened repeatedly, independently, in different regions, at different times, a pattern imprinted into two species until it became irreversible. And once it became irreversible, everything changed. Human groups that had dogs could hunt larger game, detect danger earlier, and defend territory more effectively than groups that did not. In the brutal calculus of Ice Age survival, that difference was not small. It was the difference between a band that persisted for another generation and one that did not. Which means the presence or absence of a domesticated wolf at your ancestors' fire may have been one of the quiet, invisible variables that determined whether your lineage survived the Pleistocene at all. You're not simply someone who happens to like dogs. You may be descended specifically from the humans who did not turn them away. And here the story turns inward towards something harder to look at directly. Because the wolves that approached those fires were not choosing comfort. They were choosing the terrifying unknown of a different species over the deadly certainty of starvation within their own kind. They gambled everything. Instinct, safety, evolutionary programming built over millions of years on the possibility that another species might not kill them. And it worked, which means the animal now asleep at the foot of your bed carries, somewhere in its ancient nervous system, the genetic memory of a bet made in the dark, beside a fire, by a creature with no way of knowing whether it would live through the night. Every dog alive today is the descendant of that gamble. Every single one. We tell this story as if it belongs to the wolves, as if it is their transformation, their sacrifice, their evolutionary journey toward us. But look again, because the humans who tolerated those first wolves at the edge of the firelight were changed as profoundly as the wolves were. We became a species that hunts with senses beyond our own. A species that sleeps beside predators without fear. A species whose earliest experience of interspecies love was carved into the archaeological record in the shape of a small grave, dug by hands that had no name for the emotion driving them. Perhaps the wolves did not choose us because we were safe. Perhaps they chose us because we were the only other animal on the Ice Age steppe reckless enough, lonely enough, and strange enough to choose them back. Somewhere, on a night with no name, two predators sat on opposite sides of a fire. Each one, in that moment, the most dangerous thing in the other's world. and neither one moved. That single, silent decision, repeated 1,000 times in 1,000 places across 10,000 years, is the reason you are not alone tonight. It is the oldest promise either species ever made, and it has never once been broken.